So basically, I'm going to invite the second presenter, and that is Dr. Lynda Nakalawa, who is a lecturer at the department, School of Psychology, and Andrew Mellon, PhD fellow. Miss Nakalawa is going to present about her study in which she asserts that the failure of the youth empowerment programs in Uganda is due to the unsuitable westernized view of the mindset, and she advances the African conceptualization of the mindset as arising from and shaped by the social context. It is quite an interesting study, and I request you, Ms. Lynda, to start with your presentation. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mayanja. If we could have Dr. Baluku stopping to share, I can share my screen. And while he does that and I share my screen, I just want to say how honored I am to be able to talk about some of my PhD work. And I am going to keep my presentation light because I'm doing my PhD among young people. And these young people are tuned in from all over the place, so they don't want to listen to so much theory. But Choose is here to speak to everybody, like the presenters yesterday said, to Simbude. And we are here for everybody. So I'm sharing my screen now. Please help me confirm if you can see that.
Yes, please, go ahead.
So that is my presentation. It's about voices that hold us back. And I'm looking at a female Ugandan youth as she reflects on her empowerment journey. And this is coming out of some of the studies that I did as I was starting out on my PhD. That's the brief overview of my presentation. As you can see, it's going to be very brief, and I'll get right into it. So empowerment of Uganda's youthful population is at the center of government and many of the development partners' agenda. And the question of mindset has taken root in the discussions about youth empowerment. When you look at the Uganda youth policy, those of us that have been familiar with NDP3, that's the National Development Plan, everybody is talking about youth mindsets. But the literature on mindsets does not present a clear theoretical understanding of the nature of Uganda youth mindsets. Not only that, but also the contextual factors that shape these mindsets. Now, psychology would be able to help, but the existing psychological theories, some of us have heard about the growth versus fixed mindset theory, they are not really suitable for exploring youth mindsets in the Ugandan context. This is because they tend to speak to an underlying, that is westernized, mostly British and American view of the mind. And these look at the mind as individualized, about the one person. And this is at odds with the African conception of mind, which looks at the human mind as emerging from social cultural processes. I'm so pleased to have been influenced by African philosophers and writers like Samenang and all the theorists that have talked about the concept of Ubuntu, which talks about I am because we are. And in Uganda, we talk about Ubuntu Bulamu. I was also influenced by Bakhtin's dialogical theory of mind, which states that individuals take on various mental positions due to constant, the mental dialogue that they have with multiple voices in their minds, and this coming from their social culture setting. So the purpose of this particular presentation is to illustrate the different mental positions that a female Ugandan youth takes on, or that she is forced into based on the voices that exist in her social setting during her empowerment journey. The methods that I used, I won't spend too much time on this, but we are looking at the story or the narrative of Namuli. That's a pseudonym. I've changed her name to preserve, ethically to preserve her identity and privacy. But I picked her story out of a transcript of a focus group discussion that I carried out with youth advocates in Entebbe Town Council. And when I picked out her story, I did two things to it. I subjected it to a model of narrative structure analysis by someone called Labov. It helps us to arrange a story in a logical time flow. When someone talks about their experiences, they can jump from time to time space to time space. So this model helps us to arrange the story in a logical flow, and it gives us 3 time periods in Namuli's life. I also took on another analysis method called the voice-centered relational method, and this helps us to tease out those voices that influenced Namuli and the different positions that Namuli takes on or that she is forced into based on these voices. Just a little bit more about the voice-centered relational analysis. It helps us to tease out voices and aspects of stories, like I have said, that may otherwise be ignored. And this requires that you read the same story 4 times, and each time you read that story, you're focusing on a different aspect. If you can see the areas that are in blue and green, reading 2 and reading 4, reading 2 helps me to tease out the positions she takes on, either by herself or positioned by others. And also reading 4 helps me to tease out the social culture and historical context within which Namuli is living her life. So the summary of the results I'm going to tell you about, first of all, about Namuli. She's a female Ugandan youth. She's in her mid-20s. Namuli is such a beautiful story. She has successfully lived with HIV since she was born, and she lost both parents as a child and was raised by relatives, but she is currently a youth leader and a leading advocate for young people living with HIV in Uganda and Africa. And she has been supported through TASO Entebbe. They provide care, counseling, and empowerment. And this has been Namuli's story. So the results I'm going to tell you about, they focus on 1, part A, 3 times periods in Namuli's life, as we are going to see. And then in Namuli's own words, the voices that influenced her at these times. And finally, how Namuli positioned, how she is either positioned by other people or how she positions herself based on these stories. So we can now hear from Namuli in my voice, but her words. So the first period is when Namuli drops out of school in S6 and she has no funds to continue to university. She says about this period, "This rich neighbor's daughter came to the driving school where I was working. She could not believe that I was the one working there. She asked me, 'Waliwano?' That's, are you the one who is here in Luganda?" She thought I was of too low a status to even work there. And she says the differences parents put in us as we are growing up determine how we see things. So in this case, she is positioning herself as a child from a poor family and comparing herself to a child from a rich family. Still in period 1, when Namuli drops out of school in S6 and she has no funds to continue to university, there's a time she's reflecting. "I remember a time I wanted to start a business of selling chips so that I could get some little money. My aunties asked me, 'The whole of you, how can you sell chips?' So I also gave it up because I was too special to sell chips." So she's positioning herself as too special to do small business, but remember, she is struggling and she does not have the money to go on to university. But in spite of these challenges, Namuli's story gets better. The second time period that we look at in Namuli's life is when she is seeking a government service from the resident district commissioner. She says, "I wanted a passport. I went to the RDC's office. Do you know needing a service and you go to this office and you are so scared? I had been told that if she's going to sign for you, make sure you lie about where you are going. I told her I was going abroad for a conference and she signed for me. Another girl was thrown out because she said she was going to Dubai to be a house girl. They shouted at her that she was going for prostitution. Imagine judging her without even knowing her life story or her challenges. Our leaders, it depends on who you are, where do you come from? Then you can get a service. Nayo mwavu aba wakufa. Here, Namuli is positioning herself as an anxious youth, but she also says that she is privileged compared to some of her peers. The third period is when Namuli graduates from university with the help of a well-wisher, and she starts to work. When she graduates from university, people say her. She says about this time, her. People talked. Sente yazijewa. Where did she get the money from? Yafunye abasajja. She got sugar daddies. But I had told my life story at a conference, and one of the participants was touched and decided to help me find sponsorship for campus. She continues. Then even when I performed well, when I got a first class, people said I slept with lecturers. They argued, who gets a first class in that course? That is the environment we grew up in. People are not appreciative, but sometimes you just ignore. So here she's positioned as a successful female graduate, and she's battling negative public opinion. Period 3, again, when now she has graduated, Namuli has graduated and she's starting to work. She says, remember, she has just got a job, fresh graduate. When a parent gets to know that you are working, you become the father and the mother at home. They can even borrow money and you have to pay. You are trying to build yourself up, but indirectly they are tearing you down. And here her position is of a new salary earner held back by too many demands too soon. So you can see that at different time periods, Namuli is positioning herself, or she is positioned differently. Sometimes she fights back against these positions. What are some of the take-home messages I would like us to not forget from this presentation? Youth mindsets are made up of, and they are shaped by the different voices that the youth hear or are subjected to in their social cultural setting. Even when youth seem to say that they are independent and they make up their own minds, these voices are there in their subconsciouses, and sometimes they respond to those voices without even meaning to. And they find themselves negotiating with those voices in their minds, and those voices affect them, whether they like it or not. But also, youth are not passive in the face of these voices. They take up different positions. Sometimes they agree with these voices. Like, remember when Namli said, Nzenzena, how can I make chips? She agreed with her aunties, and that was to her disadvantage. But sometimes youth protest against these voices. So when we hear issues of defiance, for example, in our community, we might be rash to judge the youth, but is it actually an effort for youth to push back or to protest against the voices that are, trying to put them down? The other thing I want us to take away from home is that the position, take home from this, is that the positions that youth take determine their actions, whether they like it or not. And their actions determine their outcomes on the empowerment programs. This can be positively or negatively. Yes, Namuli succeeded, but along her journey, sometimes she felt disempowered actually. For example, when she goes to the RDC, she felt that even if she was empowered, still she had to lie. She felt she could not be herself. And sometimes these voices empowered her. And she took, when she took a firm stand against these negative voices, she was empowered and she was able to fight back against them and to still encourage herself. The last thing I want to talk about is that the empowerment programs, however good they are, they cannot succeed without considering the voices that influence the youth. Remember, the voices are the ones that make up the mindsets. So if we are going to pay attention to mindsets, ask the youth, who are some of the people that influence you? That is how I met Namuli. I asked this group of youth advocates in Entebbe, who are some of the people that influence you? And as they were all telling their story, that's how I noticed that Namuli seemed to be telling a very specific, consistent story. And we can see how these voices that influence the youth are coming out based on the sociocultural setting. So empowerment programs cannot succeed without considering the different voices that influence their youth. And these are the ones that make up their mindsets. Thank you so much for your attention. I'd like to thank my supervisors, Professor Julius Chikoma and Dr. Mayanja Kajumba. I thank so much the entire youth leaders and especially Namuli. She knows herself. And my founder, Andrew Mellon Foundation, and very gracious support from the Choose Graduate Program. As we say in Choose, to Simbude, we are on the move and we are not moving back. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Lynda. Actually, we have some questions, but I think we shall have one question and answer session at the end. Lynda, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mayanja. For purposes of covering everything that I have answered, let me refer to the responses that I have already put in the chat. Thank you, Helen. You asked what data analysis method did I use? And first I used Labov's structure and narrative analysis to help me tease out Namuli's story into a temporal flow out of this whole mix of a focus group discussion. Then after I had Namuli's narrative or story, I used the voice-centered analysis method by Gilligan et al. To dig deeper into that story of Namuli that I now had. This way, I read the story several times, and each time I read it, I looked out for different things, the voices, the positioning based on the voices, and so on. So these are all, they are both qualitative analysis methods, and the narrative analysis was first step, and then I went deeper on the same story with the voice-centered relational analysis method. And then Thomas Doughty asked, really fascinating presentation, and thank you for highlighting the difference between Western individualized conception of the mind and the African collective or social conception. I wondered if you had any ideas about the key ways in which your takeaways might be directly related to youth programming. And I just want to focus on the response that I gave for everyone's benefit. Thank you, first of all, Thomas, for your question. First, we want to take a step back and look beyond the youth that we are working with. You know, look wider, see their social culture setting, see their families, see their peer groups, see their reference groups. These are all voices that youth carry with them in their minds, and they continuously influence these youth. So we may be saying one thing in our very beautiful programs, yet these reference groups are pulling in the opposite direction, or they might actually be helping, but we don't know unless we reflect on it. So it helps to build reflection sessions into our programs, ask the youth to reflect upon the people and voices that influence them. And it starts by the young people themselves being aware of this influence and to be able to watch how they themselves respond positively or negatively to these voices. In the end, we can actually empower youth to privilege, you know, the voices that help them to move forward. A lot of young people these days say, and I smile when I read it on my young people's WhatsApp statuses, I don't care about public opinion, you know, my life, my rules. But according to this research, these opinions live within their heads and they're often subconsciously negotiating with them. So when you say that it is okay, acknowledge that the social environment influences you, acknowledge your Africanness. There is nothing wrong with it, but don't just acknowledge it, make it work for you. I'm looking through to see if there was any other question for me. Dr. Mayanja, do you see any other question for me?
Sorry, my mic was muted. There's one from Samantha at 3:20 p.m.
She also has one from Lynda, from Bariko, and one from Samouma.
Yes, please.
Okay. I don't seem to be seeing them.
3:20.
Oh, open. Sorry, okay. Samantha, for Miss Lynda. Thank you, Samantha Biake. We have many youth in the country who may be going through the same life phase as Namuli. How best can we use Namuli's life to influence them? First of all, I really want to focus on the positivity in Namuli's life. You know, someone could say she had it difficult. She was born with HIV, she lost her parents and etc. And she has so many negative voices around her, you know. But Namuli today is this powerful young person, because even when she was telling her story, she was recognizing the voices right there in the focus group discussion, but she was also laughing, even at the times that she responded negatively, either by accepting the negativity in these voices, you know, or when she pushed back and she ended up responding basically in a negative way. She had now gotten to a place where she could reflect and see, I could have done this differently. And that is what we need to encourage our young people to do, to think through the voices that influence them, and to accept that, yes, even if I am Miss Independent, I am Mr. Independent, there are all these things that go on in my mind, and I shouldn't just push them away. I need to face them head on. So it's really about that acceptance and being able to recognize, think through these voices and take a good position, or an empowered position in response. Finally, from Richard Balikowa, no, not finally. Miss Lynda, thank you. Would you kindly tell what your conversation with Namuli implies, especially as regards what should be done to make youths feel empowered? Again, that self-awareness is the first step. Let us not try to use what I've referred here to as Western conceptualizations of mind, because there are a lot of theories of mindset. But if we take them and just plug them into our programs, they may not be the best way for youth to appreciate that, okay, as an African youth, yes, there is globalization, I understand. But as an African youth, there are all these things that are going on around me, you know, and those things don't just stay on the outside of me. They go on in my mind. They go on in my mind, and like it or not, they are going to influence me. So empowerment for youth in this case is helping them realize that, yes, these voices influence you, but you're not helpless in the face of these voices. You can actually draw strength from some of them, or you can actually stand up against these voices. But this is something that should be done continuously as you're making each decision. The truth is that even if you're alone, okay, and you're trying to decide, some of the opinions that you take on as you're making these decisions, they will come from your clan, they will come from your grandmother who died so long ago. Voices, voices, voices everywhere. But the young person is not helpless in the face of these voices. Lynda, influence of FGDs on individual stories. Would you really argue that this is just Namuli's story? Not at all, not at all. And that's the beauty of qualitative analysis. Trust me, because of that understanding of how narrative analysis works, I can actually go back to that focus group discussion. And if I read it again and I did another analysis, I might be able to see things that I did not see at that time. you know, where Namuli bounces her ideas off other things that that other people said. But I'm not out to prove whether this is Namuli's story or not. The history, the correctness of the history does not matter. With narrative analysis, what I privilege is this is what my respondents said. This is the story they are owning in that time. This is what they are saying. This is what happened to me, as Namuli is saying. So as a narrative analyst, I privilege that and I respect it. But I also know that even in the middle of that focus group discussion, she is feeding off the voices of other people within that very focus group discussion, because I mean, these are youth that are also part of her reference group. I think that's what I can say for now.
Thank you so much, Lynda.